I got to looking around, and there's not the first sprig of nutgrass out there, and we have plenty of nutgrass around here that we deal with. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having a fantastic day. It is Thursday, November 14th here in South Georgia, and on today's video we're going to talk about some of the free benefits of cover crops that we might not have even realized we were getting. So let's kind of set the stage for this discussion, and just bear with me here. So earlier today I moved our chickens onto this plot right here where we have a cool season cover crop mix planted. We've got some rapeseed there, some hairy vetch, some winter peas, and some clover. We planted this several weeks ago on another video where we were talking about cover crops. And I usually like to wait until this stuff gets a little bit taller before we put the chickens on them and let them start grazing it. But this stuff is growing really fast, and by the time they get to the other side of the plot over there, this stuff's going to be pretty tall. And they were just begging to get over here and start eating this stuff, so I obliged. And they didn't have to go far to get over there, just 10 foot behind that plot. This is where they've been for the last couple months, grazing this warm season cover crop, a mixture of sorghum sudan grass and iron clay peas. So the chickens grazed this twice. We also mowed it twice. You can see some of that organic matter down there from when we did mow it, just to kind of keep it from being so tall. It comes back fairly decent the first time you mow it, but after the second time you mow it and having it grazed twice, you can see there it's a little patchy at this point. So we'll probably scalp that remaining vegetation with the mower here in the next few days, maybe throw a tarp on this plot so we don't have to worry about it for the next month or two. But on today's video, I really want to focus on those bare patches out there in this plot. So what I was noticing today when taking a closer look at this plot is that in these bare spots, there's really not that many weeds popping up. Yeah, there's a few pigweeds still hanging around this time of year, but for the most part, these bare spots really haven't gotten covered with weeds, although they've been bare for several weeks now. So why do we have very little weed pressure here, despite the fact that most of our above ground cover crop vegetation has been depleted? Well, one of the explanations for that, a pretty simple one, is the fact that we haven't broken the soil. I know a lot of the commercial farmers around here, when they grow cover crops throughout the winter, they terminate those cover crops with an herbicide, which prevents them from having to cultivate the soil. They've told me that that really helps with pigweed. So they don't break the soil, they just terminate the cover crops by spraying them and then go behind them with their no-till planters. But I got to thinking it's got to be something more than that. So I did a little digging around, and let me share with you what I found. So there are several different ways cover crops can suppress weeds. Some of these ways you probably haven't even thought of before. Now the first obvious one is light suppression. So you get that nice dense vegetative canopy from the cover crop. It's excluding light from touching the soil there. You don't get a lot of weeds germinating. That's the obvious one. But these three other ones I'm going to mention are not so obvious, but very fascinating. So of these lesser known ways that cover crops can help suppress weeds, number one would be moisture and nutrient competition. So when we get that really dense root network that we have in that plot right there, we can't see it, but we know it's there. When we get that really dense root network, that's going to outcompete weeds, because all those roots from the cover crop are consuming all the moisture and nutrients. The weeds can never really get a foothold. Now some cover crops are better than others as far as forming that nice dense root mat. Ones that are really good about it are sorghum sudan grass, which is what we had planted here. Rye is another good one. Millet is another good one. All those form that really dense root network that helps outcompete weeds. And as a side note of that, while I was digging into all this stuff, I found one source that said adding a legume with something like sorghum sudan grass provides lots of great benefits from your soil, things I didn't even know about. And so we had always done this mixture just because it worked well for our climate, worked well for our grazing system. Turns out there's a ton of other good reasons to do it too. Now the second lesser known way that cover crops can help suppress weeds is something called allelopathy. And allelopathy is just a fancy word for plants giving off substances that are going to affect other plants, usually in a negative way. Now, I'm somewhat familiar with allelopathy, and we've mentioned it on videos in the past, specifically when we're talking about incorporating brassica cover crops into the soil, things like mustard greens or even that rapeseed I showed you earlier. We know incorporating those into the soil, they give off certain compounds that can suppress certain weeds or certain plants. But it turns out you can also get those allelopathic effects if you don't till it into the soil, if you just kind of chop and drop it like we've done with this sorghum Sudan grass here. So if you till it into the soil, you're going to get a quick, effective boost. Think about it like adding some synthetic fertilizers to your plants, but it's going to taper off pretty fast. If you chop it and drop it, it's going to be more of a slow and steady effect. So like I said, I was aware of the allelopathic effects of certain cover crops, mainly those cool season cover crops like the mustard, the rapeseed, and some other brassicas, but I had no idea about the allelopathic effects of some of the other cover crops that we could grow. So for example, winter rye residue has been shown to suppress pigweed, purslane, and even crabgrass. I also read where sunflower and clover residue can help suppress morning glories, which we've got plenty of around here. And sorghum Sudan grass, which is what we had planted here, can help suppress nutsedge and Bermuda grass. And reading that was just really interesting to me, because I came back out here, got to looking around, and there's not the first sprig of nut grass out there. And we have plenty of nut grass around here that we deal with. We also have Bermuda grass in these walkways here that likes to creep into these plots. I'm always having to maintain the edges of my plots, but not the first lick of Bermuda grass in that plot right there at the moment. So if you struggle with nut grass and Bermuda grass like many gardeners do, you might want to consider planting a really dense plot of sorghum Sudan grass in the warmer months and just chopping and dropping that vegetation. Not going to say it's a miracle worker that's going to eliminate all of it, but I think it will definitely help. And then the third lesser known way that cover crops can help suppress weeds are through these microbial interactions. Now, we dug into this a good bit on our last cover crop video, talking about all the benefits of these root exudates that we get from the really dense cover crop plantings. So when we plant these cover crops really thick and get that extensive root network in the soil, those roots are harboring certain microbes that may be specific to the particular cover crops we have planted. And those microbes may not necessarily be favorable to some of the weeds that we struggle with. So for example, grain and legume cover crops are known hosts for mycorrhiza. On the contrary, pigweed, purslane, and nutgrass are not hosts for that mycorrhiza, and the presence of the mycorrhiza in the cover crop root network can actually reduce the vigor of pigweed, nutgrass, and purslane. Not necessarily going to kill it all the time, but it will certainly reduce the vigor of it and help you out. So the microbes that are hosted by one species of plants, in this case our cover crop species, are not always favorable to other species of plants. And this is where we get the good weed suppression in there. The cover crop microbes help reduce the vigor of the weeds because the weeds don't like those same microbes. Now, from what I understand, these microbial interactions of cover crops versus weeds is something that's just now really being explored by scientists. So we don't know a whole lot about it yet, but it's very exciting that there is some promise there and there are some things going on. Makes cover crops even more exciting than they already were. So if we think about this from a whole cost-benefit standpoint, the main reason we grow cover crops is to feed our chickens, and we get the fertilizer in return. Cover crop seed is cheaper than chicken food when we consider just how long we can leave our girls on a certain plot. And like I said earlier, we were aware of how cover crops suppress weeds with what they have going on above the soil, how that dense mat of vegetation is going to shade out the soil and prevent weeds from developing. But we were unaware of all those things going on underneath the soil, those free benefits that were helping suppress weeds as well. Now, we could stand here all day and argue about the easiest and most effective ways to manage weeds in your backyard garden. Everybody's got their favorite methods, but the fact that we're getting a lot of really good weed suppression from the cover crops makes them even more of a no-brainer, in my opinion. And if you're not growing cover crops in your backyard garden, even on a very, very small scale, you definitely need to be. So I hope you enjoyed the video today, and there's plenty of room left on the cover crop bandwagon, so feel free to jump on and ride along. And if you missed that last cover crop video where we talked about all the benefits of those root exudates and all those additional microbial interactions, you can watch that right here. We'll break it all down. Really, really good stuff on that video too. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.